One of my favorite phrases is this. The question is not does something have a story, but rather do you have the language to read it? And I can think of no better illustration of that phrase than plant growth. I know what you're thinking, plant growth, that sounds boring. Actually, it's really not. You see, the way a plant grows is its story. And that story was written by a set of chemicals that we call plant hormones. Understand the hormones, and then you can understand and read the story of that plant's life. Come on, I'll show you what I mean. Before we go any further, let me first explain what a hormone is. A hormone is simply a chemical that's produced in one part of the body that has its effect in a different part of the body. So for instance, in the human body, adrenaline is a hormone. It's produced in the adrenal glands on top of your kidneys, but once it's released, it has its effect like in the heart rate and your breathing and your eyesight and other areas. So produced in one part, and it has its effect in a different part. Plant hormones are no different. They're produced in one part of the plant, but they have their effect in a different part of the plant. So there's 5 groups of hormones that are going to do their writing and write their stories on the plant. They're going to write their stories at different times of year, and they're going to write their stories in different ways. You learn to read what those stories are, and you learn to read the plant. So, who are these authors of plant life? There are 5 of them. There's the auxins, there's the gibberellins, the cytokinins, there is abscisic acid, and there is ethylene. First one we're going to talk about are auxins. Have you ever noticed that when a house plant is put near a window, it tends to lean and grow toward the window? Have you ever wondered why it does that? That is because of the work of auxins. You see, auxins' job in the plant is to elongate the cell, to take the cells that are produced in the growing areas, the meristems, and lengthen them to cause the plant to grow. Well, auxins are inhibited by light. Y'all get all messed up. They won't grow. They won't do their job if there's a lot of light shining on them. What does that mean? That means if here's the window right here, and here's my plant, well, this side of the plant is in shade. This side of the plant is getting the light from the window. Since the auxins lengthen the plant, and since they're inhibited by light, this side lengthens faster than the other side, and it causes that plant to curve in that direction toward the light. Now, we also see it in forests. Have you ever wondered why when you're deep into a forest that the trees are all real tall, super tall and skinny? That's because the shading of the canopy blocks any direct sunlight from hitting one side of a plant to any great extent more than another side of the plant. The light is up. So what happens is, since the whole trunk is pretty much shaded, the whole trunk grows at the same rate, and that shoots the trees up really, really fast and really tall to try to push the branches up above the other trees so that it can get the sunlight that it needs. Auxins lengthen cells. Cytokinins are the next group of plant hormones that I want to talk about. Where auxins were inhibited by sunlight, cytokinins are stimulated by sunlight. And what cytokinins do is they produce multiple cell divisions, and also known as branches. Cytokinins are responsible for producing branches. Well, because they're stimulated by light, that means that the side of the plant that has the most sunlight is going to have the most branches. Let me show you an example of that. If I can tip this camera up right there, you can see this larger plant here. It's growing up, but it is shading this smaller plant, the smaller tree right here. Notice that the smaller tree, because it's shaded on this side, not only leans in that direction, the effect of auxins being shaded, but notice also all the branches. All the branches are growing that way. There's no sunlight this way to stimulate the cytokinins to produce branches. They're all going to grow in that direction. So that is how cytokinins work. Gibberellins are a third group of plant hormone. And what they do is they basically, well, they have a couple of different jobs. The first one is in the springtime, they're responsible for taking that dormant seed that's been sitting in the dirt all winter long and cracking it open and allowing that growth process to begin. So gibberellins break that seed dormancy and causes the new growth, the new plants to germinate early on in the year. The other thing that they do is they take, you know, the little wimpy plants, little wimpy, and they turn them into Arnold plants. Yeah, Arnold. Okay, that was kind of weird. Anyway, so what they do is they work in between the branches to strengthen, to lengthen, to increase the size of plants. They make them more robust, they make them taller, they make them thicker, they make their fruit more abundant. That's the purpose of gibberellins. It takes little wimpy plants and it turns them into big, strong, robust plants. Have you ever noticed that if you have a bunch of unripe bananas, that if you put them with a ripe banana and kind of cover them, that very quickly those unripe bananas ripen really fast? That is the effect of ethylene. Ethylene is a gas that's released by ripening fruit. It is the chemical that actually ripens fruit in the fall and gets them ready. It breaks down the cell walls to help to soften the plants, and basically it takes those fruit and it gets them ready to be consumed by animals so that the animals can trot off somewhere else and deposit the seeds from that plant in a pile of fertilizer, let's say. Okay, so that's the idea of ethylene. Oftentimes, this is what they do with tomatoes. If you go to the store and buy tomatoes, well, if you pack a bunch of ripe tomatoes into a box and then put it on a truck that's going down a highway like that for a couple of hours, you're going to have half tomatoes and half ketchup. So what do? They pick the tomatoes while they're green, and then when they get into the grocery store, they simply spray them with ethylene, like that, and that ripens up the fruit the same way it would on the vine. This is why organic produce, organic tomatoes, let's say, are more expensive than non-organic. The reason is because very few of the organic tomatoes survive shipping because they're picked when they're ripe. That's why it's more expensive to get the organic. That was for free, by the way. You don't have to know that. The last hormone to talk about is called abscisic acid. And what it does is it will protect leaves during times of drought by closing their stomata underneath. That's how a plant's going to release water and regulate the amount of water that's inside. So if it's drought time, those are going to close off and stop the water from being lost through transpiration, which is like evaporation from a plant. They also are going to help to increase seed dormancy and basically prepare between the abscisic acid and the ethylene. They also help to prepare the tree to overwinter, especially if you're in the northern areas where there's lots of snow and the trees really go dormant. We've got to protect them and keep them from freezing in the wintertime, and that's the job of those two hormones. So now that you understand the different jobs that these hormones have, the different stories and how they're going to write them onto the life of the plant, should be pretty easy to figure out when they're going to do their writing. So the gibberellins break seed dormancy and make the plant more robust. So they're going to be active spring in through the fall. The auxins and the cytokinins are responsible for the growth of the plant, for lengthening and the branching of the plant. So they're going to be active from the spring through the summer, maybe a little bit into the fall, early fall at best. The ethylene is going to be responsible for ripening that fruit, so that starts happening late summer as we move into late fall. And of course, abscisic acid, preparing those seeds for dormancy and locking the plant down for the winter time, that's going to be active in the fall and the winter. Now, I have one more hormone to talk to you about, and really, It's not actually a hormone, it's called a pheromone. Now here's the difference. We talked about this earlier. A hormone is a chemical produced in one part of the organism that has its effect in a different part of the same organism. A pheromone is a chemical that's produced in an organism that has its effect in a different organism, often of the same species, but not necessarily. These pheromones that I'm going to talk to you about right now, they're called jasminates, and they are incredible. Was an amazing smell to us, and a smell that says summertime. For the grass is literally going, ah, help me, my head is being cut off. What it's releasing that we're smelling is one of the pheromones, one of the jasminates. And it literally is when you damage one piece of grass, it releases that smell to tell all of the other grass, look out, buddy, because it's coming. It's coming. In a lot of plants, what this does is it helps when one blade gets damaged, it releases that jasminate, causing the other blades to begin to produce chemicals that make them unflavorable to predators, that is, to deer and cow and things like that. So when one part of the grass gets damaged, it's warning all the other blades so that hopefully they can make themselves taste horrible so that the predator, in this case an herbivore, will leave the grass alone and move on to another patch of grass that still tastes yummy. Perhaps the grass, that's on the other side of the fence. Maybe that's what... But probably by far my favorite jasminate is the one that's produced by cotton. You see, here in the South, we have tons and tons of cotton fields. Well, cotton has an amazing ability. What it does is this. When an insect begins to attack the cotton releases a pheromone, a jasminate, that literally begins to go and attract parasitic wasps. And these parasitic wasps then come in and they attack, stun, and lay eggs in the insects that are attacking the cotton. They then carry them off and bury them so that the young of the wasp can propagate. So literally, it's like calling for the cavalry to come in and rescue you. Is that not just insanely wonderful or not? My favorite. Given what I've said about the activity of these hormones, for instance, cytokinins being stimulated by light and auxins being inhibited by light, well, you might think, well, wait a minute, trees like this pine tree behind me, they're pointy at the top where all the light is. You expect that to be all the branches, and down on the trunk where it's more shaded, you would expect it wouldn't be growing up, it'd all be growing out, right? Well, there is another aspect of this, something really cool that's called apical dominance. Apical dominance is this. The apex of something is the top. It's the pinnacle. So the apex of that tree is the very, very top. Apical dominance is whenever you're at the top of a tree or the tip of a branch, what happens is that the auxins in that area are stimulated because of where it is in the plant, and the cytokinins are inhibited. The further away you get from the apex of the plant, the more the cytokinins can kick in. So what that produces is that beautiful triangular Christmas tree shaped plant. The cool thing about it is that enables the lower branches to be bigger, longer, and therefore they don't get shaded out by the upper branches. In other words, all of the branches and all the leaves on the plant can be productive for the purpose of photosynthesis. If that's not evidence of design, I don't know what is. So I talked about the idea of using our knowledge of plant hormones to read the story of the plants, because it's written into the way that they grow. So let's check this out. We got a set of pine trees right here. These pine trees are leaning slightly in that direction, and notice that all the branching is going off this way, and there's almost no branches growing that way, leaving this big, huge gap. Well, our knowledge of these plants tells us this, that there had to have been something here shading. That allowed the elongation to push the plants that way, and the sunlight coming in from the open area to cause the branching to go off. So when I look at a situation like that, what that tells me is that these plants were influenced by a much larger tree growing next to them, causing them to grow the way that they do. I can even see it over here in this oak tree right here, where you have all these branches going off, the majority of the branches this way, and only a few branches coming that way. So I should find, if I go over there, the evidence of a large tree that used to be there that's not there now. Let's go look. So here's those large, amazing pines. And sure enough, as soon as we come down here, look at what used to be here. This incredible oak, blown down by a storm that came through this area about a month ago. So as I said in the beginning of the video, the question is not, does something have a story, but rather, do you have the language to read it? So I've given you some grammar, I've given you some vocabulary as far as the language of plants. Get out there, explore some city parks or nature parks in your area. Check out the landscaping in your church parking lot. Check out even the way the grass grows in your own yard. Get out there, read those stories, because that's really what it's all about. Reading the stories that are written around us. So try to ask yourself, what are the auxins doing? How are they working with the cytokinins to produce tree growth? How are the gibberellins functioning in to make things more robust? When are they active? Do you see evidence of abscisic acid and ethylene going on in the forest and the trees and the woods around your home? Check these things out, and by all means, take a whiff and see if you can't hear the screaming of plants as they're crying out in help for all kinds of amazing things. Look for those jasminates. Get out there and explore, and have a great time doing it.